Good afternoon, Inspector. Just to say we are live on YouTube.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hopefully the people who lost touch are either able to get back in touch, and those who haven't been able to are be able to go on YouTube. But anyway, the inquiry is resumed with that in mind, and I just want to check, has Miss Reid been able to get in touch? If not, we have, yes, Miss Williams.
No, so I've not heard back from Miss Reid. I have emailed her, but
Yeah.
it looks like Tenterden's still down. So
Right.
Well,
Anyway,
with me.
Yeah, thank you. So what we'll do is that the Tenterden, if it's still down, will be able to view on YouTube, and Miss Reid will be able to see that Mr. Ross has attempted to respond to the questions that were raised. So I feel that's probably sufficient at this stage to cover that. But obviously, if she does manage to get in touch before Mr. Reid's given his evidence, there might be a chance for her to come back. But I feel as though her questions have been put to Mr. Ross anyway. So so I'm happy that well, I think he has certainly attempted to respond to them anyway. So so anything anyone would like to raise before I move back to Mr. Ross and Mr. Howell Williams? No, in that case, then Mr. Ross, Mr. Howell Williams, if you can continue. Thank you.
You're muted, Mr. Howell Williams.
Thank you. Is that better?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we were looking at what the local plan itself contemplated in relation to growth at Tenterden, you remember. And I want to now look briefly at what the local plan inspector was contemplating. And so we need to pick up again CD 2.2.
Yes, bear with me with this one. Sorry, Mr. Howell Williams. I did close it. I probably should have left it open.
Yes.
I know that it will open. It's for some reason, it's a Word document and not a PDF on the council's website. That for some reason, on my computer, just takes longer to open. But I am there with you now.
Great. And could you turn to page 9 of the hard copy, paragraph 33 onwards?
Yes.
And this was, of course, in the context of Waits promoting a different strategy with more growth at Tenterden, you recall.
I believe that that's what they were doing, yes.
Yeah.
I believe that there were not only Waits were doing it. I mean, there was clearly a promotion of various different strategies.
And the inspector rejected the Waits representation in relation to more development at Tenterden.
I'm not sure that that is correct. I think the inspector considered that the strategy proposed was sound.
I'll leave that one with the inspector to wrestle with, but he did determine, didn't he, what in the context of the spatial strategy would be appropriate for Tenterden.
Well, that's what the local plan does.
Yeah, so the easy answer is yes, that's exactly what he did, Mr. Howell Williams. Yeah.
No, no, it isn't the easy answer.
Well, it's the straightforward and rather sort of direct answer. Okay, I don't mind qualifying an answer, but the question is quite clearly put. He did examine the appropriateness of growth at Tenterden in the context of the distribution strategy. That was his task.
That is correct. It's a slightly different question to what you asked before, but to that one, I could answer yes, Mr. Howell Williams.
And it was clear from his conclusion that the more limited distribution of development at Tenterden was appropriate. In other words, the more limited distribution than that which was being urged upon him by Waits.
Well, I wasn't at the examination in public. I don't really know. I think that is a fair answer. I don't know, and I haven't viewed all the examination in public sessions. And when appearing at an examination in public, what the inspector is doing is testing the soundness of the plan. If he considered that the strategy put forward, and clearly Ashford considered the plan submitted was sound, that's what an inspector is doing.
I'd really rather take this rather more quickly. It's perfectly plain what he was charged to do, and it's perfectly plain, because you'll have read the report, what the inspectors decided. In the context of soundness, makes no difference to the question that I asked, which was the question of appropriate growth in Tenterden. One of the tests of soundness, as you will know, is the question of an appropriate strategy. So he decided whether or not the strategy was appropriate, having regard to Waits' representations that it should be different. Okay?
Yes.
I'll just put the question to you again.
Hmm.
The inspector clearly concluded, didn't he, that the more limited distribution of development at Tenterden was appropriate.
Certainly the distribution of housing proposed in Tenterden is more limited than, say, Ashford. Absolutely, Mr. Howell-Williams.
Not quite the answer, but I'm going to leave it there. I won't put it a third time. So when we look to paragraphs 33 onwards, we see from paragraph 33 that he was examining the distribution strategy by reference to the proportions that we now see in SP2. Correct?
What proportions in SP2? Sorry.
The proportions of about 80% against 20%.
In terms of allocations, yes.
Or 76% in terms of commitments plus allocations. I don't mind which way it's cut, whether you call it vast, great majority, it's not their majority. I think you and I are on the same wavelength here, and it'd be helpful if we could assist the inspector more directly, to be honest.
Well, Mr. Howell-Williams, that's all I'm doing is assisting the inspector and giving him my evidence.
Okay, so the question was quite easy. In paragraph 33, he examined the question of distribution in relation to the proportions that we now see broadly in SP2.
I think what he's doing is in 33 is setting out percentages of allocations.
Yes. And looking at 15% in the rural areas and taking it up to 24%, and the reference to percentages according with the general thrust of SP1 and the preferred option is sustainability appraisal.
Yeah, now that's what he says, yes.
Well, of course, that's what he said. You know what, I'm going to move on to the next paragraph. Tenterden, paragraph 34, is the second largest settlement. Taking existing commitments and allocations into account, some 625 dwellings would be provided over the planned period. This equates to some 5% of the residual housing requirement in Table 1. I think that's a reference to Table 1 that has that appears in the adopted published version. This is not a precise fit with the size of the town compared to the borough as a whole, but consideration has to be given to constraints such as the AONB. You see that?
Yes, I do.
So he examined the appropriateness of the quantum of development in the context of the distribution strategy, expressly taking into account the landscape setting of Tenterden.
Well, clearly he's talking about constraints such as the AONB. And in the local plan specifically, it refers also to the conservation area. And as we know, this scheme does not harm either of those. But certainly that is the reference made. It doesn't say landscape setting, it says the AONB.
It says such as, and we've also referred to the local plan supporting text, which refers to landscape and not just the AONB.
Yeah. I'm not, in my view, it's clear to that what he is saying is that the AONB is the greatest constraint, but I am not saying that he didn't take other constraints into account. That's my reading of it.
Good. Could you take up the planning statement, please, and turn to page 43, table 6.2, to which you made reference in your evidence in chief.
Yes, I have that. Thank you.
Okay. And we see there in the blue line the commitment to 330 in Tenterden. Do you see that?
Yes.
Then 275. And then the total 605. Do you see that? And then
Yes, I do. Yes.
of 145 in Tenterden of 750. So far as Tenterden is concerned, the impact on top of what was being contemplated in the local plan and endorsed by the inspector is an increase of 24%.
If those are the maths, then I'm not going to disagree with you.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of what the inspector is referring to in paragraph 34, of what was appropriate, taking into account commitments, do you follow me? 625. 145 on top of that would be the 771 figure, which differs very little from the figure we've just referred to. And again, he was saying that that was appropriate. And we know that he decided that on the basis of the constraints, where you would at least concede that he didn't ignore the landscape setting of Tenterden.
No, I agree. And what he says is that the overall number equates to some 5% of the borough's residual housing requirement. And when you look at the table, with the additional 145, it equates to 5.54. So I think that accords with around 5%.
Thank you. Could you look, please, to, this is Goodyear's Appendix 5.
Is this a proofs or rebuttal?
Main proof.
Which page is that on, please?
Now, that I can't help you with. It's in Appendix 5, and it's the windfall schemes permitted since the adoption of the local plan in Tenterden. I'm happy if somebody else wants to provide the page reference online.
I've got a hard copy of her appendices.
Yeah. Do you remember the appendix we were looking at before, rural housing allocation?
Yeah.
If you go to the next one.
Oh, you see, what? It's got Appendix 4 again. She's got two Appendix 4s, doesn't she?
Right. Okay.
That was what confused me. So, are you Appendix 4 windfall development?
That's it, in Tenterden.
Windfall schemes. Okay. Yes, I'm with you.
And we can see that since the adoption of the local plan, in other words, in only a period of 4 years, there have been, in terms of windfalls, including land south and east of Tilden Gill Road, 226.
Absolutely, yes.
And so as another consideration in terms of how the inspector should be approaching this question of a scale, we see that there's an excess of the local plan allocations. Remember the 225 figure of Tenterden, plus the 226 windfalls, plus the 141, I beg your pardon, from the appeal proposal. That's nearly a 40% increase of on top of the allocations for Tenterden, isn't it?
Yes, it is, yes.
Thank you. And
but Mr. Howe-Williams, that doesn't surprise me,
well,
if I may say, but because as I set out in evidence in chief, that I'm not surprised that there are more windfalls in Tenterden, given that you can't grant consents for any windfalls in Ashford. So I'm not surprised by this information, but I'll leave it at that.
okay. And we know and can agree that in terms of windfalls, policy SP2 enables windfalls to come forward to meet not only the housing target, but to the housing land shortfall.
So where I've got the housing target,
Yes.
where
And I thought this was common ground, actually, that SP2 provides for windfalls to come forward to meet the housing land shortfall. I thought that was part of your case.
SP2 allows windfalls to come forward to meet
And-
housing requirements. Yes,
Exactly.
whatever the housing requirement is.
Exactly. And whether, if there's a shortfall, it meets that purpose as well, doesn't it?
Well, it allows housing development to take place.
Including to meet any shortfall that arises.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. And that can be distinguished from many other similar policies you might think in other local plans, which don't expressly and in terms allow for the consideration of windfalls to meet the shortfall.
Can you point out a plan such as that?
No,
That doesn't allow windfalls.
No. I didn't say it doesn't allow windfalls.
Yes, you did.
I asked you whether or not this was unusual in allowing for windfalls to come forward expressly to meet housing land shortfalls.
No,
What you're saying is not rare.
it's not rare.
Well, that's fine. It's good. Okay. But that's one of the benefits which makes it a workable policy.
It's not working.
It's a workable policy. Whether it's failing may be a different point that you pray in A.
It could work, yes.
But it's there and it's workable. And in
Yes.
that respect, it's up to date.
No,
Well, it must be, if it is workable, by definition, it's up to date.
no.
You can't have it both ways, Mr.
Yeah, well, I can.
No, you can't. You can't say it is workable, but it's not up to date in that sense.
If it's workable but not working, it's not up to date.
Right, I'll make a note of that. But you do agree it's workable.
It is workable.
Thank you. And reference was made, you recall, to the paragraphs on my page, hard copy, page 21,
what?
2.83,
Of which document?
in the local plan,
2.83, dealing with any future housing shortfall.
Yeah, and this is why I put the question to you, because this is supporting text for the policy, demonstrating that the policy is intended to work to allow windfalls to come forward to meet housing land shortfall. And I won't reread it, but we know that there's reference to the small scale change in the rural areas. That's paragraph 2.84, do you recall? And then 2.85, respective priorities should be used as a guide by the developer and decision makers to the way in which the local plan approach should be applied. Namely, there should not be significant substitutions of housing numbers away from Ashford and its periphery to the rural parts of the borough. It's not the case, and this I want to ask you about this paragraph, it's not the case that each planning area should maintain its own 5-year housing land supply, as this will continue to be calculated on a borough basis. However, if a borough housing shortfall in supply occurs as a result of significant non-delivery within Ashford and its periphery, the variances in policy emphasis between the two planning areas will need to be weighed accordingly, alongside the need to improve housing land supply and meet housing need. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And what's been said there is that one has to look to the policy. There's nothing there that says that the policy has suddenly become redundant, far from it.
It doesn't say that the policy becomes redundant, but you just need to weigh it differently.
When you say it just needs to weigh it differently, there's
Weigh the balance between Ashford and the rural areas accordingly.
and one can look at the impacts of changing the balance by all means, but the supporting text should not be understood or interpreted to say something other than what's in the policy, should it?
No, the supporting text has not changed the policy.
Exactly. And the supporting text, therefore, should be understood as simply, well, as a material consideration, there might be a justification for doing something other than what the distribution in the policy sets out to be done.
That is correct.
And the measure of that will be against what I've referred to as the unsustainable outcomes that we referred to from the previous paragraph in the supporting text.
I accept that that's your case, but that's not what our case is, and not what my case is, and not what the policy says, what the justification says. But I accept that's your case.
Yeah, no, I didn't ask you whether that's our case.
Mm.
What I asked you to help with is that's why it's important that the inspector should examine whether or not to depart from the distribution set out in the policy, okay, by reference to the unsustainable outcomes that we referred to earlier. I appreciate you say they don't take effect, but he should have regard to them, shouldn't he?
No, no, Mr. Howell-Williams, because if you did that, the whole reason why this paragraph is included is because Ashford and the periphery are not delivering. Therefore, what you would be doing is assessing against something that isn't delivering. This is only brought into force, or this is looking at a situation where the sustainable location of Ashford is not delivering. Therefore, how can the inspector do that, your assessment? It's accepted that it can't be in Ashford and it's for periphery.
Okay, I've got the answer. So he doesn't look at those sustainable, non-sustainability outcomes, and I'll make submissions on that answer. So he shouldn't look at the question, for example, of the impact on the character and intrinsic beauty of the countryside.
No, I didn't say that.
Well,
you talked about sustainability.
That's one of the unsustainability outcomes referred to in paragraph 2.66.
Yeah.
But it is. Okay, and SP2, as you and I can agree, I hope readily, Mr. Ross, has a twofold test for windfall developments.
Yes,
you did acknowledge
yes.
that, at least in your oral evidence in chief. And one is, it has to be consistent with the spatial strategy, okay, which we've been discussing. And of course, the other thing is that it has to accord with other policies in the plan.
It has to be consistent with other policies in the plan, yes.
And one arm of the first test is to look at the question of suitability and environmental sensitivity.
I'm sure that is one of the policies in the local plan.
No. It's in SP2. Okay, so we've got two tests. We've got windfall housing development will be permitted where it is, one, consistent with the spatial strategy outlined above. Okay? And then there's with other policies in the local plan.
Yes.
Quite separate, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
Yeah. And one of the matters set out in the spatial strategy above is relating to development in the rural areas, being consistent with the suitability of sites and environmental sensitivity.
No, no. The spatial strategy is a spatial strategy that relates to the distribution of housing. And therefore, the majority of development being in Ashford and more limited development being in the rural areas. That's the spatial strategy.
Okay, so when windfalls come forward, you say, when looking at whether it's consistent with the spatial strategy, you don't look at the question of whether development will be of a scale consistent with accessibility, infrastructure, services, suitability of sites and environmental sensitivity.
That's the policies of the other policies of the local plan.
Okay, so could you help with this then? When I look to HOU 5, okay, you say, well, there's a clear, perhaps we should turn to it. A clear link, you say, with the with SP2.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Just for the sake of clarity, SP2 does cross-refer to other policies in the plan, but you can confirm, I've no doubt, there's nothing to say that compliance with HOU 5 means that the development complies with the spatial strategy as set out in SP2.
No, I accept that that is correct.
What you say is, well, HOU 5 is a clear and positive policy. I don't want to spend too much time on this question, but it's one that no doubt the inspectors had before him on a number of other occasions. But it does say, will be acceptable, proposal for residential development will be acceptable. Do you see that?
Yes.
But then, of course, there is the proviso, isn't there? An important proviso.
Yes, there are criteria that set out that I totally agree.
Yeah, what I said was there is the important proviso.
Yes, those criteria have to be met.
And so the policy is only to be regarded as positive if all the criteria are met.
Yes, I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah. So it might be more accurate to say, rather than this is a positive policy, that Tenterden is identified as a rural settlement where development might be acceptable.
I think it is a positive policy because not all local plans allow development close to or adjoining built-up confines of settlements. In fact, most local plans have got strict control over development outside settlement boundaries. So this is a positive policy, and it's also positive in terms of it mentions Tenterden as well. So I do think it is a positive policy, but I do accept that you do need to meet the criteria. Okay,
I don't think we're going to help the inspector further on that for submissions. You say in your evidence that HOU 5 little a, you say is the main plank of the spatial strategy.
Mm-hmm.
Say that
where do I say that? If you could take me to that, please.
Oh dear.
I certainly do not query that you're absolutely right, but I would just like to be taken there.
Yeah. It's at 8.38.
8.38.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And
the effects on the settlement.
There's nothing in the policy that says that, is there?
Sorry, nothing in the policy that says what?
That says that HOU 5A addresses the main plank of the spatial strategy.
Okay. What I've said is HOU 5 addresses the main plank of the effects on the spatial strategy, the effects on the settlement.
Right. So what's the answer to my question then?
Well, HOU 5 looks at whether the scale of development is proportionate to the size of settlement, level, quality, etc., whatever within there.
Yeah.
And looks at ability to serve services to absorb level of development in combination with any planned allocations, committed development, etc. All of that is exactly what policy SP2 is looking at. So I do think that there's a clear link in relation to the spatial strategy.
I'll just ask the question a third time, and then I'll move on. There's nothing in the policy, is there, that says that HOU 5A addresses the main planks of the effects of the spatial strategy?
That's my judgment.
So as the answer to my question, sorry to be a bore, Mr. Ross, but I want to take a note, and I don't want to have.
No, I appreciate it. The words, the main plank.
On mute. You're on mute. You're still on mute, I'm afraid. That's a shame.
Ah.
Am I back?
Yes, you're back. You're back again now. We lost you, but you weren't on mute. But for some reason, we lost your.
I apologise for that. I don't know. I really hope that I'm not having technical problems here. But I'm back. So I think what I was saying was, in response, the words main plank of the effects on the spatial strategy do not exist in HOU 5A. That is my judgment.
Thank you. And we can agree that each of these criteria, none are given any greater importance than any other.
I can't see that in the policy. Yes, absolutely.
And so far as A is concerned, that relates to the question of the of scale of services and the ability of a settlement to absorb additional demand. It's a sort of 106 type.
Well, I think it goes a bit more than that, Mr. Hal Williams, because it's talking about the proportionate to the size of settlement and level, type and quality of day-to-day services. And looking at other allocations, it may be the case that some of it is dealing with 106 as well. I wouldn't wholly disagree with you on that.
Okay, well, I think we'll possibly leave that for the inspector. Thank you. I just want to turn briefly now to AB 70 and the proposed confirmation of the order. Just so I'm clear, because we need to make submissions on this, and I'm just a little unclear about the appellant's case on it, okay? The fact is that there is an inquiry into the order which has been made by Kent County Council.
Yes, Mr. Hal Williams.
And the result of that might well be to confirm the order.
It might be, yes, Mr. Hal Williams.
And you and I would agree, we're not asking the inspector to determine that question. He'll be glad to know. And it's right, isn't it, that you've not argued that there's no prospect of the order being confirmed?
I can't argue that, Mr. Hal Williams.
Of course not. Now, in your proof, you say, well, this is a matter for legal submissions, but there's been an awful lot of evidence on the right of way from the appellant, who's gone to at least some trouble to deal with the right of way. Is it the appellant's case, just so that I'm absolutely clear, is it the appellant's case that the prospect of the order being confirmed is not a material consideration?
There is no current footpath, and therefore my view is that it should not be considered as part of this inquiry.
So it's just in my language, so I understand, the legal submissions made on the appellant's behalf will be to say that it's irrelevant and not a material consideration.
I believe that that will be the case, yes.
Okay, I'll make submissions on that. Thank you very much. Just lastly, you'll be glad to know, and the Inspector will be, that I'm not going to go through the substantial, significant, and so on of the benefits, but I did want to ask you about just two matters. One is on the sports pitches, and I think you give significant weight to that benefit, don't you?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. And so that's at the sort of highest end of the scale that you provide, is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Do you, so far as the country park is concerned, do you give any discount, any reduction in the benefit or the weight to be given to that benefit on the basis that there's already significant public access on AB12 and the public right of way?
AB12 is a public footpath. It just goes from A to B. There's no other public access to the country park area.
Well, I know that, but in terms of the weight that you've given it, is this right? You don't reduce the weight on that on the basis that there's already public access?
There's no public access to the country park.
The public right of way running alongside the country park.
Public right of way running along the, yes, there is, but there's no access beyond it.
Okay, well, I'll just make a note. There's no reduction.
No.
Thank you. That clears that. And on the sports facilities, again, you give the significant weight to this benefit. Can you help with the Inspector on this? I'm right, aren't I, that it's not proposed, and indeed I expect there to be a condition, no lighting?
That is correct.
Yeah, and that's a deficiency, isn't it, in terms of the ability to play sports on a football pitch?
No, it isn't.
You don't think it's a deficiency at all that one can't in the winter play after 3:30 or even
No.
3 o'clock?
No, I don't.
You don't. Okay,
No.
so no reduction there for that reason.
No.
And I suspect you'd say, well, you have to, because you've been at the top marks, as it were, but that you haven't reduced the weight to be given to the provision of sports facilities on the basis that it's a grass pitch. And my understanding from what I've read is that that might only allow for play from between 3 and 6 hours a week, depending on the weather.
Grass pitches are the best pitches to, if you're providing an 11-a-side adult pitch, grass pitches are fairly standard. Why would you not want to provide a grass pitch?
On this particular case, the evidence that I've read attached to the sports facility statement in the documentation referring to the ability and constraints on drainage, I have read that the pitch will only tolerate between 3 and 6 hours per week. I may be wrong, but that's what I've read. And if that's right, should you not be reducing that rather than assuming it's some top flight facility?
No, I don't think so. No.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much. No further questions. Thank you very much, sir. Thanks very much, Mr. Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Howell-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. I just wondered, is Miss Reid available? I don't think so. But I think even then, if she's listening in, I'm happy that her questions have been put to you via Mr. White, and you've read them and you've responded as you wish to those. So I wouldn't imagine if she put them differently that you would have any different response. So
no, sir. I've read the questions and I've provided my full response to them, and I wouldn't provide anything further beyond what already I have responded in relation to those questions.
Right. Okay, thank you. And I know there's not anyone, I mean, I'm assuming there's not anyone else here who wishes to ask questions. What I'll do then, Mr. White, is Mr. White available? Have you got any?
Yes, sir. I haven't been blown over yet.
Sorry?
I haven't been blown over yet.
Oh yes, yes, we've been suffering a bit from here. Yeah. So would you like to re-examine on anything?
No, sir. Thank you very much.
No re-examination. Right. Thank you. So in that case, what I'd like to do now is thank Mr. Ross. I don't think you're needed on to give evidence anymore from what I can see, because I don't think there's anyone else going to ask questions. So thank you for that. And just need to highlight where we're going from here. Now, is it with the information that I've requested? I mean, I need, well, there's a few things I need. One is an agreed itinerary for the site visit. And after that, I'll look at when I'm going to do it. Well, it's going to be on the Thursday, the 23rd. But timing and everything else, I'll need to know who's going to be meeting me and where and what time. And so that will have to be agreed. But I'm happy to agree that when we resume on the Wednesday. But it's definitely going to be on the Thursday. But it's just a matter of agreeing a time and who's going to be present. So that, but I haven't had the itinerary, so hopefully that will be sent through at least before Wednesday, or preferably on Wednesday, or by Wednesday really, so that I've got a chance to look at it and see what's put forward. So if that can be provided by Wednesday when we resume. So the second one is I had a look through some of the conditions. What I might do is I might give some of my comments forward on those conditions between now and when we resume, so that people can have a look. And I just wondered whether there's anything further on those conditions.
There is potentially, sir. Obviously, in the light of our discussions this morning, the council and the appellants will seek to get an agreed wording on the number of units or condition. Yeah.
Right. So, and there's a few conditions that are in dispute anyway.
There are.
Which we'll need to go through, and I don't know whether there's anything got any progress on those, or whether they're going to just be there for discussion purposes.
Well, I think obviously it would be sensible for both parties to seek, obviously, the dream scenarios. On Wednesday, we have an agreed schedule of conditions. It might be that is optimism, but at least we can, I'm sure Miss Ashton and those instructing Mr. Howell Williams will make every effort to reduce the differences on the conditions.
Yeah, one when I looked at the conditions that have been put forward, there's a few comments I've got generally, which could be looked at. One is there's quite a number of tail pieces on the conditions, which I don't think are appropriate, which gives the council the powers to agree something that's different from what the conditions say. And generally they're not used, I mean, unless they're justified. I think it's unlikely that they're going to be appropriate. And the other point is it seems, I mean, the conditions are split between full planning permission, outline planning permission, and both for full and outline. It appears to me, I might be wrong, but it appears to me the way it's been set out, there are some conditions under the both full and outline that are also dealt with under full and outline separately. And whether they're duplicating conditions or not, that needs to be looked at, I think. I can't remember exactly which matters they dealt with now, but there are some that seem to, I mean, I think SUDS is one, but there was another one, I think, I can't remember now, but they're things to look at anyway when the conditions are being looked at. But they're the main points that I noticed, really. But there are a few other minor things that I might look at. But anyway, we'll be going through those on Wednesday. So the next, and maybe there will be additional conditions that have been provided. I'm assuming there will be, and maybe others that may have been agreed or not agreed or whatever. But anyway, if a more up-to-date version can be provided, perhaps to take on board those comments I've made, that would be helpful as well on Wednesday. And then, like I say earlier, was the SIL compliance statement. I'm not sure whether that's affected by whether there's an agreement or not. I would have thought a SIL compliance statement should be available anyway, whether there's an agreed Section 106 agreement or not.
I don't
because
think
they're basically going in anyway. The council is having to justify why it's wishing these to be in the agreement. So I can't see any reason why not having a signed Section 106 would stop that. But anyway, maybe someone can say that. But I would hope that there is a SIL compliance statement fairly soon. I think Kent County Council have put in some information earlier, but if that can all be put together in one statement, that will be helpful rather than bits and pieces from. I think some of it's under their own evidence that they've put forward, but it would be helpful if it's specified in relation to the agreement. But anyway. And the numbers that are in there. So that would be helpful. And then the other matter is the Section 106, whether it's an agreement. I mean, if there isn't an agreement, an agreed one that can be signed, what is the appellant's action on that?
Well, sir, did you say if there is agreement?
If there's agreement, then if there is an agreement that's signed, then I'd expect to be able to see that eventually. But if it's agreed and not signed, it's waiting for me to look through it and then make my comments before it is finalised. But if some of these matters that are in dispute are not agreed, i.e. the trigger points or whatever, what is the appellant's stance on that?
Well, so can I hold fire on that? You're asking me to deal with a situation which is hypothetical at the moment, and it depends. It depends on the gap. I mean, there are three ways of dealing with this. I mean, obviously, to have everything that's agreed in one agreement. To have the second option is everything that's agreed in an agreement plus potentially blue pencil clauses in the alternative, one of which it represents the council's position and one which represents the appellant's position. And then you have the ability in your decision to indicate which one you think should apply. And the Armageddon scenario is obviously to have a unilateral. But, frankly, I prefer rather than us to, can we see where we get to, frankly, over the next course of the next 3 or 4 days? Because as Mr. Al Williams and I have said, and we obviously come at this with our own team's perceptions and instructions, but be rest assured that everything's being done by both parties, frankly, to see if we can get agreement. Whether we can, I don't know. We'll wait and see. But I do know that my solicitor and Mr. Howell Williams' solicitor have really put their backs into it and are continuing to do so. But I do think, what I would say, I think it is necessary. Obviously, we got the session on Wednesday morning. What I would like to do, if possible, is for you to say you would like a copy of where the 106 sits, probably by lunchtime on Tuesday, and that should indicate, the extent of agreement, disagreement that's there, so you have a clear idea and can take that on board on Tuesday afternoon in the light of Wednesday. So that gives, I hope that you think that gives you enough time to look at it. That's what I would like to do. And the same for the updated list of conditions. If we can send a pack to you at lunchtime, say at 1 o'clock on Tuesday, of both the updated conditions and the 106 where it sits. And in the dream scenario, that will be agreed. And then there's a huge, great raft of scenarios that we might be in. It might be that one clause is not agreed. It might be, I simply don't know. But I think it would assist those negotiations to have till Tuesday lunchtime to try and see what can be done by the parties to meet their differences, so to speak.
Right.
Are you content with that? Are you all right with that, sir?
Well, also the civil compliance statement, I would hope that would be available maybe even before that, but certainly the latest, I think 1 o'clock Tuesday for all of these. That's the latest, I would say. So preferably before that.
Okay, we will absolutely pass that message on.
So just to be clear, is that 1 o'clock on Wednesday?
No, Tuesday. I think we're having because the session is on Wednesday morning. And so can you just give an indication just for forward planning? What would you prefer to do first on Wednesday, conditions or 106?
It depends where we are. I prefer the conditions probably because I think the section 106 is going to be more tricky probably. And so I don't mind, but
no, I don't mind either. But I think can we preliminarily say? I mean, obviously, yeah. But just to know for people's availability. And can I also ask the question, and I know this is slightly difficult, well, in relation to the 106, I'm sure Mr. Howell Williams and my instructing solicitors will be present, but can I just ask, is there anyone else, particularly in the condition session, that you feel you'd like to have available to you in relation to the conditions? I mean, are there any of our experts that particularly, and again, you don't have to give us an answer now, but obviously if you want to have, say, Mr. Marshall back to talk about the condition relating to highways and access, whatever it may be, just tell us.
At the moment, having looked through them, and they have been agreed with the council, and as far as I can see, potentially with Kent County Council as well. That's how I'm assuming. So I would say that there's probably no one from highways needed in that understanding. Looking at conditions again, the other point that I'd like to raise is some of the conditions are suggesting with consultation with the highway authority or with a drainage authority or something like that, and that isn't appropriate for a condition either. So those sort of things are put in conditions. But anyway, they're things that it's really just approval of the local planning authority for the conditions. and the fact that they consult with anyone else isn't part of the condition. It's the local planning authority that would do the consultation. It isn't a condition that the local planning authority consults with someone else. But anyway, that's something else that was put into the conditions. But anyway, so anyway, that's another matter to be looked at in the conditions. But I can't see. I mean, I think they're more to do with planning matters rather than anything else, because I'm assuming that the conditions that are put forward have been agreed with the relevant experts who've arrived at the information that's been put into those conditions, i.e. the reports or whatever are referred to. So I don't think there's any need for other parties to be present for the conditions. The section 106, if there are matters that are going to be in dispute, there might be a need for people on that, perhaps Mr. Mayat or someone like that who's on targets. But anyway, I mean, it's a difficult one at the moment because I'm not sure what
I completely understand. Well, the other thing I should just raise is there might be, because of the lateness, I might make an application for it to be finally executed after the close of the inquiry. I mean, it looks like we're on pretty good progress to close the inquiry on Friday, and I will take further instructions, but I think there are various signatories, as I understand it, and it might be that we ask for 7 days or 10 days in order to execute.
I'm not, I mean, as long, I'm not against that, as long as the matters have been cleared up by the end of the inquiry.
I agree.
Otherwise, if there's matters in dispute and they haven't been cleared up, I'm not going to keep it open until then.
I'm not. Let me make this clear. I am not in any way indicating that there will be a debate to be had after the close of the inquiry on the contents of the 106. Absolutely not. The only thing I'm asking for is a request on the execution. You will leave the inquiry next Friday knowing what the position is on the 106.
Oh yes, I'm happy if there is a delay in getting signatures and dating it and everything, then there will be an area of time for that, definitely. But anyway, we'll get to that when we. So hopefully that's outlined with these things. I mean, the itinerary as well for the site visit. It will be helpful to have that on the Tuesday as well, so I've got an idea by the time we get to Wednesday of the proposed itinerary. So I've got an idea of how I'm going to fit it all in and everything. So that would be helpful with a plan. The other point I'd like to raise actually on the conditions while we're here is it suggests on the conditions that there are the full planning permission, the outline planning permission. It would be helpful, I think, for those conditions to have a plan to show what area is subject to the full planning permission and what area is subject to the outline, to avoid any confusion when it comes to actually implementing those conditions. Bearing in mind it could be anyone who implements it. So it needs to be, I mean, I know that Waits know what it is and the council knows what it is, but to avoid confusion, I think a plan would be helpful. But
we will do that, sir. Thank you. We'll do it in conjunction with the council to make sure they agree with it.
Right. Anything else anyone wants to raise before I adjourn until? Well, I'm looking at 9:30 next Wednesday, which is the 22nd, is it? Yes. Wednesday the 22nd.
No, 23rd. Isn't it the 23rd next Wednesday? I think it's.
Oh yeah, yes, you're probably right. It is, yeah.
Wednesday the 23rd. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, 23rd, yeah.
No, don't worry.
Wednesday the 23rd, yeah. Okay. So right. So the inquiry's adjourned until Wednesday, 9:30.